Don't compare yourself with other people, compare yourself with who you were yesterday. It's in responsibility that most people find the meaning that sustains them through life. It's not in happiness. It's not in impulsive pleasure. Adopt responsibility for your own well-being, try to put your family together, try to serve your community, try to seek for eternal truth. That's the sort of thing that can ground you in your life, enough so that you can withstand the difficulty of life. Accept the terrible responsibility of life with eyes wide open. The truth is something that burns. It burns off dead wood. And people don't like having the dead wood burnt off, often because they're 95% dead wood. There's a personality trait known as agreeableness. Agreeable people are compassionate and polite. And agreeable people get paid less than disagreeable people for the same job. Women are more agreeable than men. I don't tell people, you're okay the way that you are. That's not the right story. The right story is, you're way less than you could be. Life is tragic. You are tiny and flawed and ignorant and weak, and everything else is huge, complex, and overwhelming. It is more difficult to rule yourself than to rule a city. The idea that women were oppressed throughout history is an appalling theory. Don't lie about anything, ever. Lying leads to hell. No one gets away with anything, ever, so take responsibility for your own life. Free speech is not just another value. It's the foundation of Western civilization. Don't be dependent. At all. Ever. Period. Abortion is clearly wrong. It's very hard to find your own words, and you don't actually exist until you have your own words. If you don't stand your ground, then all that happens is people push you backwards. Happiness is a pointless goal. To me, ideology is corrupt. It's a parasite on religious structures. To be an ideologue is to have all of the terrible things that are associated with religious certainty and none of the utility. If you're an ideologue, you believe everything that you think. If you're religious, there's a mystery left there. If you're talking to a man who wouldn't fight with you under any circumstances whatsoever, then you're talking to someone for whom you have absolutely no respect. The people who hold that our culture is an oppressive patriarchy, they don't want to admit that the current hierarchy might be predicated on competence. Women deeply want men who are competent and powerful. And I don't mean power in that they can exert tyrannical control over others. That's not power. That's just corruption. Life is very difficult. One of the most ancient of religious ideas that emerges everywhere, I would say, is that life is essentially suffering. One of the things I've told men over and over and over and over is if you're being rejected by all the women that you approach, it's not the women. I happen to be a big fan of Western civilization. I think it beats the hell out of tyranny and starvation. It makes sense that a witch lives in a swamp. If you're not going to be rewarded for your virtues and instead you're going to be punished for them, then what's your motivation to continue? Music has an intrinsic meaning, which has always been mysterious to me. When you start to realize how much of what you've constructed of yourself is based on deception and lies, that is a horrifying realization. There were some great clinicians in the 20th century, great men. Freud was a genius. Jung was a genius. Carl Rogers was a genius. There's a half-dozen psychologists of the 1950s and humanists of the 1960s. Men and women aren't the same. And they won't be the same. That doesn't mean that they can't be treated fairly. Part of the core information that I've been purveying is that identity politics is a sick game. You don't play racial, ethnic, and gender identity games. The left plays them on behalf of the oppressed, let's say, and the right tends to play them on behalf of nationalism and ethnic pride. I think they're equally dangerous. It's a small percentage of people who do the 80-hour-a-week high-powered career thing, and they're almost all men. Why? Well, men are driven by socio-economic status more than women. You can't have a value structure without a hierarchy. They're the same thing because a value structure means one thing takes precedence over another. We're so immaturely cynical as a culture. We're not wise enough to look at an institution like marriage and to really think about what it means and what it signifies. It signifies a place where people can tie the ropes of their lives together so that they're stronger. It signifies a place where people can tell the truth to one another. The highly functional infrastructure that surrounds us, particularly in the West, is a gift from our ancestors. The comparatively uncorrupt political and economic systems, the technology, the wealth, the lifespan, the freedom, the luxury, and the opportunity. Become aware of your own insufficiency. You can't go backward in life. As pessimistic as I am about the nature of human beings and our capacity for atrocity and malevolence and betrayal and laziness and inertia and all those things, I think we can transcend all that and set things straight. I've studied authoritarianism for a very long time, for 40 years, and they're started by people's attempts to control the ideological and linguistic territory. We have to rediscover the eternal values and then live them out. If you learn a martial art, you learn to be dangerous, but simultaneously, you learn to control it. I have a hard time figuring out what kind of box to put me into because I don't know exactly what's going on around me or why. But I need to stay outside of boxes because then I can look at what's inside of them without being part of them. The connection between psychology, mythology, and literature is as important as the connection between psychology and biology and the hard sciences. Assuming if there's such a thing as reality, if you have a false relationship with it, how can you do anything but fail? It's not just human nature to associate in tribes. It's deeper than that. Once someone has spent enough time cultivating bad habits and biding their time, they are much diminished. Much of what they could have been has dissipated.